Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast.
Hey everybody, how you doing out there? It's 5:30 in the morning right now as I'm recording this. Uh, I've been awake for nearly an hour and a half. I don't know what's going on. I'm not just did, I slept really well for a few hours and then I just kind of woke up. So uh, maybe my sleep pattern got off over the weekend. It's Monday morning as I'm recording this. I gotta go get dressed and get ready for work, but I have a little bit of time. I think I could record an episode and get it out there since I'm a little overdue for one. So first up, I've got two calls. Um, from Joe Richter and from the Pink Phantom regarding the last episode. So let's hear what they have to say.
Yo, BJ, just finishing listening to your latest episode. You are not your character sheet, neither are you. And yeah, man, awesome message. So important. Growing up back in the 80s and 90s, the last thing me or any of my friends wanted was to have someone put a label on us. That was the last thing we wanted. And nowadays, especially with the advent of social media, like you mentioned, it seems like young people are so determined to put themselves into as specific as a box as possible for a label, and I just don't get it. I mean, I do get it because they've been indoctrinated with this stuff for 20 something years now, and it's like identifying yourself based on one of your perceived traits. There's no difference than identifying yourself and sectioning yourself off by eye color or skin color. Like, it's weird that people's younger people don't seem to realize that. Like, you don't. I don't know, man. So good on you for fighting the good fight and trying to talk to kids that yeah, you are more than just a collection of your traits. It's such an important thing to know, because when you focus on just one thing, you exclude everything else, and then what are you left with, man? I don't know. I don't know, dude. But anyway, that was an awesome episode, man. I really appreciate the message you're putting out there, the work you're doing in your real life, in your home life, in your personal life, in your gaming life, man. You're keeping it real. You're one of the real ones, BJ. So anyway, dude, I will talk to you soon. Peace out.
Thank you, Joe. Everybody, that was Joe Richter of the Sporadic Hindsightless podcast. Be sure and check out his stuff. He's been going through some of the books he's read lately, so interesting things to say there. Uh, yeah, Joe, I appreciate what you're saying. Thanks for the kind words. And speaking of young people, we'll get into that in a little bit as I recap my last session with the kids. But yeah, I think you don't want to go so far in the other direction. I don't think you're doing that, but I'm just riffing off what you said as I'm having some thoughts here. Is that particularly teenagers, sometimes young adults, they sometimes need the labels to figure out who they are, and when someone like their parents or authority figures, or maybe just feel like society as general rejects that part of them, then they just double down on it to say, no, this is who I am. um, it's not a phase. Sometimes it is a phase depending on what we're talking about. But a lot of times it's not a phase, and you need to accept me for who I am. That's okay, I guess. But I think sometimes particularly young people get locked in the fight, and they don't think about all the other things they are. um, which some people come to that okay. Eventually they sort of develop a more well-rounded or balanced sense of themselves. But I do worry that sometimes people get locked into just those labels, and that's a collection of all they have, and then they're relying on something external to themselves to define who they are and what they're about. And I think to some extent we all need that. It's okay for us to embrace the family values or traditions we might have been raised with from our parents or grandparents. It's okay for us to connect to whatever our community is or culture or whatever that might be. That's fine. But even every member of a culture is still a slightly different person, so we go, so I think, yeah, you just need to strike that balance. And I do worry that, particularly as socialization goes more online, either through social media or just there's even a disconnect, even if you're in a Zoom call with someone, right? That you're relying on those external labels and markers to define who you are, because you're not really having to connect with a person. If you actually sit down and can get to know a person, you kind of vibe with them, you get a sense of who they are beyond those labels, and they get a sense of you beyond those labels, more about your personality and who you are. um, but I think without making those connections, when our connections are just real superficial or transactional, sometimes our friends help us figure out who we really are on the inside through those connections. If we don't have those, or if your friend is just worried about their list of labels, and knowing your list of labels, and there's nothing deeper, I think that doesn't bode well for people. So, but I'm at the age now where I'm shaking my fist and going, "These kids today." So I try not to dwell too much on it, or overemphasize it, because I am resisting the pull of middle age to do that. So hopefully the kids are going to be okay. I know some good kids that are going to be okay, but there are some that I worry about. Of course, that's the same goes with adults. Anyway, Joe, thanks for the call. And here, let's see what we got next.
Hey BJ, the Pink Phantom here from the Phantom Thoughts podcast. Really enjoyed your last episode. You are not your character sheet. I think that's a great way to describe that philosophy, that the phrase "the answer is not on your character sheet" is supposed to represent, because the answer is could be somewhere on your character sheet, because in the older school style games that a lot of this discussion tends to be about, when they say the answer is not on your character sheet, the character sheet is where your inventory is. And a lot of older school gaming is about creative use of the items you have with you, be they magical or mundane, or creative use of spells. Whether you're talking about the infamous 10-foot pole, or how much rope you have available to you to span a crevice or go down into a crevice, or if you have a wand that has several different effects you can do. One of them is an obvious combat effect, maybe, but the others are just general effects it can do in terms of manipulation of light or materials, or the creative use of barrier spells, or something like the floating disc spell. All those things are utilizing them in ways that maybe are not indicated in the description of the item or the spell, or just the item or spell is just a generic "here this is," and how you use it is up to you, because there's no necessarily obvious way to do it, but it's just a tool in your toolbox. The character sheet shows you your toolbox, and so there could be an answer on your character sheet. Now, in something like a social situation, or where you're having a discussion with someone, or you're trying to figure out something that is an intellectual puzzle, that is, something that in a more modern mindset you would look for a specific skill, or you would look for an ability check to roll. And that applies to game masters as well. Creative use of things like saving throws for situations that aren't precisely described as a saving throw, but may have properties similar enough to one type of saving throw or another, that you may want to give that as a solution to a character involved in a situation. That also applies to the GMs as well. But there is an answer on your character sheet, even in old school games. It's just sometimes you have to think outside the box to find that answer, and that's what the phrase, the answer is not your character sheet, is supposed to encourage, is thinking outside the box and not necessarily being trapped. That's a loaded term. I probably shouldn't use that term, but being just only in your character's mindset, utilizing your problem solving abilities as a human being, as the player of the character, is what that's meant to be. And the way that you phrase that you are not your character sheet, and that even your character is not just your character sheet, is, I think, a better way to phrase that. And I really appreciated the episode and how you related that to your own individual area of expertise. So I just wanted to call in and tell you, job well done, and I really enjoyed listening.
Well, thank you, Pink Phantom, for those words and that analysis. As he mentioned at the beginning of his message, he's the host of the Phantom Thoughts podcast, another really great podcast you should check out. He routinely updates his. He does a solo play with original Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where he does a lot of just roll a dice on the table, and he's not just looking at the adventures of sort of the party of heroes he started off with, but they displace an orc tribe, and he follows the orc tribe and sees where they wind up kind of in the region, and they roll random encounters and get into conflicts, and it's expanded with to several different groups um, over time. So it's really interesting. So be sure and check that out. And he's also doing a service to our community by keeping us abreast of resources that are out there that we might be interested in, with the humble bundles and blog posts and videos and things like that. So be sure and check out Phantom Thoughts. Um, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. That when you think of what's on your character sheet as a list of resources that you might use, but you're not limited to, as opposed to, well, this is just who my character is. Um, I think that's and you can see how the old school is. You're a fighter, you have on armor and a sword, and figure out how to use that in any way that would help you, or try something else if you're in a situation where it won't. Versus, say, modern games, and again, I like modern games, but a 5e or Pathfinder 2 fighter who's got a list of special maneuvers and abilities, that now I'm sorting through that to sort of engage with problem solving, and not that everybody does it this way, but I think it does pull people into, okay, well, we're not really in combat, so I don't got much to do. Um, which maybe in a social encounter, maybe not, but anything that involves athleticism or a physical feat of courage or toughness or athletic, any kind of test your physical prowess, that should be something a fighter should kind of do, right? Anyway, thank you again. Thanks also to Joe for that call, and now let's turn over to a new topic. So I've had a couple of sessions since I last updated with my son and his friends. We've had some players graduate and move on to college. And we've had two sessions, and then the one we just ran today, the second of the two, they brought two more friends in. So it's almost like they're mostly friends through their participation in speech and debate and performing arts, band, stuff like that. So it's some seniors move on, and they bring some freshmen and sophomores into the group. It's kind of a neat thing going on there. So who knows? Maybe even when my son has graduated and moved off somewhere else to college, if he doesn't go to college here locally, I might just keep it up, as long as you know, you know, I think people can trust me with their teenagers to come over and play D&D, even if my kid's not here. But anyway, so they, I think, ostensibly have finished the Caves of Chaos. They, and recall, I've sort of rewritten the Caves of Chaos with kind of an underlying plot, and put the caves more distant from one another, so you have to explore around and look from them. They're not all within a stone's throw of one another. So they went into the uh, when the last time I updated, they had cleared out the temple, which is supposed to be kind of the last, or at least the most challenging, maybe not necessarily the last, but at least the most challenging encounter. It's full of undead and some evil priests. Um, and so they managed that, and were really concerned that they had to do it without a cleric who couldn't turn undead. They still managed to pull it off, but they rescued this. Turned out to be a Medusa, who was the kobolds treated as their queen. Um, so they we just sort of started that we just assumed that in the interim they had returned her. Um, and then they went back to the keep and rested up, and then they go back into the forest to confront this troll that is overseeing the goblin forces that are occupying the forest. They had found, if you recall, they'd found a contract between the troll and someone named Victoria Ash, but does not appear to be any of the priests, even the one that was sort of in charge of the temple, um, you know, in the caves of chaos. So, but this contract remains until um, uh, Victoria Ash either destroys the keep or takes it under her control, or unless she voluntarily ends the contract, or there's the passage of 6 years, 6 months, and 6 days. So they go back, and I think they were thinking they were going to fight. I think a couple times they've been determined to fight this troll, and they can probably defeat it if they want to. It's. I use the stats of an ogre mage, but I think they're at it where they could defeat it. But we managed to role play it out, and this troll is very manipulative and wheeler dealer kind of character. So they sort of talk themselves out of a straight up fight every time. So they go back to this troll who's introduced himself as Nemo, which just means no one. I think probably what you'll find in this world that I'm creating, that every time you meet a troll, they'll say their name is Nemo, unless you meet two trolls, and then they'll probably either be Nemo the first, Nemo the second, or Nemo the tall and Nemo the grim. Or it's going to be a kind of a running thing that they won't give a real name, a true name, right? So they find in Nemo's lair, there's some bugbears there. There's some hobgoblins that they've moved in to take place of the bugbears they killed last time. They bluff their way past the hobgoblins that are guarding the door, saying, you know, we need to check on some of the prisoners on behalf of the bugbear chieftain. And so they go and they find, of course, one of the two chieftains, Hugs, is still in prison there. He's been kind of locked up for being, not following orders and getting into little side quests and stuff. Um, anyway, there's he's in there. There's an orc warrior. There's a couple of human merchants, and then there's a trio of human adventurers: a fighter, a cleric, and a thief, along with a female dwarf who's the last member of the dwarf clan, um, that that had been run out of the mines originally. Um, so they also, the uh, assassin character kind of looks around the corner nonchalantly and sees a cache of barrels, and he gets the lid off one before they catch him. It's tucked in an alcove, and it's full of black powder. So I had already figured out that part of what's going on here is the goblins are manufacturing explosive powder. So next they go see the troll Nemo, and he um, assumes because they've returned, they were successful in rescuing the kobold queen, the Medusa, and getting the kobolds headed out of the mine and back home into the underworld. But they weren't supposed to come back in the forest once they finished. He gave them leave to do that, so he's not happy that they're there. But they start talking. He wants to hear the story of how they accomplished their task, and they discover he's still bound to hold the forest until one of the conditions of this contract is met. Well, they said, well, let's go find Victoria, and there's some of them are saying, well, we'll just kill her, and he's like, well, if you kill her, I'm still stuck here for the next 6 years or so. There's nothing in the contract that says upon death, her death, it's null and void. So they can get a sort of a description. This is the female, some sort of priest of chaos. So there's clearly not any of the people that they fought. Well, I guess there were some female acolytes under there, but they're able to establish that this is not any of the people they defeated. It must have been just the lead priest there must have been one of her subordinates, and the troll doesn't know where to find her, but he does ask, "Have you encountered any other agents of chaos lately?" And they had, when they had gone and visited the lizard folk, uncovered that there was a shapeshifter, there was a doppelganger who was posing as a lizard folk shaman that appeared to be a priest of chaos, and so they decided to go back to the swamp and look for more information. So they also are able to sort of, hey, in show of good faith, can you give us one prisoner? and they agree to it. So they choose the cleric. It's a young man named Falco who's a cleric. So now they have an NPC cleric in the group. So they go back to the keep. They get mounts so they can travel a little faster, and then they set out in the morning to the swamp to visit the lizardfolk mound. And so here's where random encounters are great. I love random encounters. So each hex we roll for a random encounter, and about a mile before they reach the lizardfolk mound, this black dragon emerges from the swamp water, and just they all get splashed with water. But because I rolled a random encounter for a dragon, I got a white dragon, but it didn't make much sense, so I just switched it to a black dragon. But the reaction was not hostile. It was more kind of that curious, indifferent on the reaction roll. So um, one of the characters, the halfling fighter, actually speaks Draconic. But if you know, you may or may not know, some of you would, in old school kind of original D&D, not every dragon could speak. And so if a dragon can speak, then there's a chance it can cast spells, but maybe not. But if it speak, it can't cast spells because it can't say the magic words, right? So they discover this dragon can't talk, but it clearly understands her. So I had to kind of rule on the spot, thinking of some from a world building. It doesn't really say anything about if it has to do with intelligence or why the dragons can't speak. And I thought, well, let's stick with the idea that dragons are intelligence, and the ones that can't speak, it's because dragons don't have the actual, anatomy to speak the way humanoids do. But the ones that can speak, maybe through this sort of the kind of vocal mimicry that parrots and crows and ravens can do. Um, that's how they actually learn to speak and can actually then, you know, do the magic words to cast spells if they're able. And maybe it's more difficult because magical words are much more challenging to articulate correctly, and you don't want to screw that up, right? So there's some kind of on the fly world building. But what I said is basically the dragon can understand, obviously can understand you, but it can't talk, and they kind of figure out, oh, it can't talk. But the dragon points to the lizard folk mounds and lets them go. Uh, but then it follows them, and it just sort of stays kind of at a distance. So at the mound, they interact with the lizard folk that they had helped before, and they say that they know who the dragon is. This is a female black dragon called uh, Sagandrus. I used a random generator. This is what's really cool about random stuff. The name actually came up, Sagandrus the Voiceless, which is perfect. So she is called Sagandrus the Voiceless one. Probably expected some kind of tribute, but realized that because they couldn't understand that they needed some help, that's why it pointed to the lizard folk mound. Um, Food or valuables or something. So the party kind of says, "Hey, we don't have a whole lot," but they pulled together some gold they could spare. They also had a magician's spell book that turns out the NPC cleric, and I had planned this. I didn't just throw this in there. It happened earlier. I just forgot to mention it. Had managed to sneak away a spell book from a wizard. It was a trio of adventurers. The wizard of their party had died, and so the illusionist was able to copy some of those spells into her spell book because there's some overlap on the spell list. But then this they just have this extra spell book, so they throw the spell book along with the gold and a couple of their weapons, and that seems to appease the dragon, and she departs. So the lizard folk say that there's this doppelganger had come from somewhere east of the mound. And they do know there's a structure up along the river in that direction that was made by humans. And what I had decided was when they defeated the Caves of Chaos, I wanted to make sure they got up to 4th level before I moved on to the next thing. Um, and I don't think they're going to go back, and they never really showed any interest in the actual goblin hobgoblin caves. Although who knows, they might change their mind as we resolve things. But I got the sense they're going to just try to get everybody to leave without another fight. Anyway, so this is basically going to be the moat house from the village of Hamlet. It's just out abandoned. It's much older and not near a town. Um, so that's where we ended with some direction and them setting out again. So we get to our second session, and we got a couple new characters join. new players joined, and they both, when they rolled up characters, decided they both wanted to be elves. One of them is playing a cleric, and the other one is playing a berserker warrior. And we kind of talked about elves because they're so long lived. Um, you know, elven adventurers are basically young adults taking their gap year before they go home and settle down and do whatever it is they're going to do for the rest of their centuries of life. It's just that for an elf, a gap year might be half a century. so we kind of talked about that's the role. You can play your elf however you want, but that's kind of that's kind of the default. So use that as a base, and you can deviate as much as you want, but just know that that's kind of what most elves are like. And also the fact that an elven berserker might be more of someone who goes into kind of a battle trance as opposed to a just furious rage. But again, I leave that to the players to decide how they want to do it. Anyway, so when we start the session, we make the thing. I said, well, what are you guys doing in the swamp? You just wandering around? Do you have any sense, any ideas? They're like, well, we're just kind of wandering around as young adventurers. I was like, okay. So you're in the swamp, and in the distance you see a black dragon flying, but you also see just a shorter distance away some sort of what looks like it might have been an ancient shrine or something, and it is partially sunk into the swamp. Um, and of course it's covered in moss and vines and stuff. But you see that, well, we'll go in there and duck down until the dragon leaves. So I kind of anticipated that that's what going to do. They didn't have to, but that's what they did. So then we return to the main party. They're headed to the river to this ruin, but they notice that the dragon is following him at a distance. Um, Sigandris, the voiceless one, is following at a distance. They don't know why. I think my plan is that the dragon will want to use if they're successful, the dragon will want to use the moat house as its lair and might demand a cut of the riches to let them leave. But we'll see. Before they reach the river, they see that they also see the shrine, and they get there just in time to see these two elves duck in. So they go to investigate. Well, this is this isn't random counter. I just did this as a kind of way to kind of get everybody together. Uh, I designed this as just being it's an old shrine that serves as a mausoleum, but it's flooded with swamp water because it's sunk partially into the water, and it's also the lair of a hydra. So the elves in the doorway kind of get in the doorway. The warrior one takes a couple of steps down in the water to kind of look around. The hydra pops up just as the uh, adventuring party kind of gets in view of the door. So they see one elf standing in the door from the back, and they hear him start shouting. So they rush up to see what the issue is, and so we get into combat with the hydra. And it didn't go. I mean, I think one of them took a couple of points of damage. They did pretty good job of uh, going after the hydra. It had 5 heads, and they took it out pretty well. Everybody, the cleric, the new elf cleric, was the only one who really didn't contribute. We had a few players missing, so we didn't have any spellcasters. It was all the warriors. We've got a ranger, a fighter, another kind of berserker warrior, and then a character that started off as actually a thief, and then the player kind of was absent for a while, and we started talking about, particularly when we were switching over to swords and wizardry, the type of characters that were available, and we're doing some world building, and said, oh man, I wish I'd played a paladin. I'm like, well, let's let you just dual class into a paladin. So you stop being a thief. What had happened here, another reason I kind of set this up the way it did, it serves a couple of purposes, is I kind of feel bad for the character because they don't have a lot of strength. They got a very high charisma, but they don't have a lot of strength to be effective, as a frontline paladin. But then this is why this is actually an ancient shrine, and what's under the water is also the burial. It's a sarcophagus, which is the burial site of a paladin. So after they defeat the hydra, they find this. They discover this sarcophagus, and I also said even when they're running up to see what's going on, the paladin feels this sort of spiritual pull, like like they need to go in there and do, and there's a real compelling reason they need to go in there. So they discover the remains of this warrior, and he's got his armor. Well, what little was left of the body, along with the armor and clothing, is just beyond deteriorated beyond repair. But the sword, long sword that it's holding in its hands, is just magnificent and pristine. So obviously it's magic. So the paladin picks up the sword and gets struck with a trance. So this is an intelligent sword. And so the sword is called Duty's Call, and everybody got a good laugh because of duty. And so the players determined to find a better name for this sword, so everybody doesn't laugh whenever we say Duty's Call. Um, uh, it's a holy avenger. It was it's because it's intelligent. It's created to, I said it's created to help paladins in their duties. Not only is a magical sword, so it's a +3 in the hands of a paladin, which will make up for, I think, that lack of strength and being a little bit behind on the hit table. Um, this is the shrine of a deceased paladin named Sir Tyrion. Who knows how long it's been here? Long enough to have sunk into the swamp. And so it seems like that the Tyrion's friends tried to bury him with proper honors, but they didn't know that the sword needed to be passed on to another paladin or taken to a temple or someplace until another user could be found. So the paladin has an intelligent sword, which I think is going to be, probably. I imagine the sword is kind of like a, constantly reminding. It's kind of like Jarvis and Tony's just voice, in Iron Man, Tony Stark's head, just reminding him of things with kind of a little bit of a dry sarcasm. Particularly when maybe they're not going to do a very unpaladin-like thing, knowing that they used to be a thief until they had a kind of conversion moment. And the other random thing I rolled up for a power of the sword is that it can grant X-ray vision, so you can temporarily see through walls, right? As long as they're not lined by lead. Okay, so the elves decide to follow with the party. We've got a cleric now, so I just let the NPC cleric sort of fade into the background along with the other player characters whose players weren't there. And they discover the moat house on the banks of the river, just as described by the lizard. The gates are hanging open, so they approach the gates, and a group of giant frogs emerges from the bog around the kind of narrow, dry path to the gates. The halfling almost gets swallowed, but in just a couple of hit points lost for a couple of characters before they kill the frogs. One of them coughs up in its death throes a large gem. And so then yeah, that's where we left off. So when we come back, they're going to explore the moat house from the village of Hamlet. Although there's no village of Hamlet, this is and the big bad at the end is not the the cleric from the Temple of Elemental Evil, right? It'll be Victoria Ash, or so it seems at this point, right? So that's the latest there. And I said, speaking of kids, these are fun kids to play with. They're all really good kids, very creative, and enjoy the game. So no real psychology there. It's just Joe happened to mention, doing things with kids, and we talked a little bit about kids earlier in the show. But this is a good group of kids, and I think most of them are going to be okay. It's still weird. We've had several people rotate in and out, but right now I think we've got, as of the new players, 9 people when everybody's here. Most of them are girls. It's very. We've got 3 people who aren't girls out of 9. So um, it's I'm just flashing back to it was harder to get one girl to play D&D. Not that there weren't always girls playing D&D, they just weren't as that numerous. And so I think I think the first time I ever played D&D with a female player, I was probably nearly 30 years old. So wow. Anyway, well, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, that'll wrap up the show. I had another idea I want to talk about. I've recently finished reading the original Marvel Comics run of GI Joe, and I've started on the volume 2, which was published by IDW Comics. I think they started in 2000. in the early aughts at some point, where they had just sort of their own sort of relaunch GI Joe, but they did a second series where they brought Larry Hama, the author, back to just pick up. They even numbered it, so GI Joe Marvel ended on 155. The first issue of this one is 156, and he just carries the story as though there'd been nothing else happening. And that went up to issue 300, and then when Skybound, which is a division of Image Comics, got the GI Joe license, they let him continue with 301. So in volume 3, so there are 2 completed volumes of GI Joe, A Real American Hero, and there's a current one and currently ongoing, which is a volume 3. So, but what I wanted to talk about was Cobra Commander as sort of the model for kind of like the arch villain in a campaign. And turning back to psychology again, Cobra Commander is sort of an interesting study in sort of criminal personalities, particularly the Cobra Commander in the comics, not the one from the cartoon. He was just a buffoon, but the comic book Cobra Commander is a really good villain. But I want to talk about that, but we've run out of time for this episode. So again, thanks for listening. I'll be back as soon as I get some free time to record in the near future. But until then, wherever you are out there, I hope you're getting better sleep than I am. But take care of yourself and make someone happy today.
Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art is by Dave Bone. Be sure to check out his stuff at ironseer.com. You can leave me a message. I have my SpeakPipe account linked to the show description. You can also send me an email at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Just embed a voice memo, or I'll just read the text to your email during a future episode. Once again, thanks so much for listening.